So the NetGuardian DIN represents one of the two basic splits in really any remote monitoring architecture. You're going to have remote boxes that act as kind of an IP gateway for sensors and equipment alarms, and that's what the NetGuardian is. And then also there's going to be some kind of a central aggregator, which may or may not be us, because like I think well, actually in a if it was that client I was thinking of, there are T-Mons, but in other ones we sell to many large clients where they may have a SolarWinds or some kind of generic SNMP manager, and we might report to that, and our T-Mon head end may not be involved at all. But we'll take a quick look at those. NetGuardian wise, there are many different models. Actually, most of them are going to be rack mount that we developed. If you look at like our sensors page, these are all third-party sensors for the most part. This one actually I think we built, but you see a lot of all sorts of different things you might want to monitor. And anytime I get a strange new request, hydrogen sniffing was a relatively new one in the last couple of years for battery off gassing. So that's not a sensor we manufacture. It's going to be something that either latches a contact closure or sends us an analog voltage or 4 to 20 milliamp current, and we can pick that up at the NetGuardian. And so these are good for flexibility, which is why we support them. But whenever possible, we use this architecture because when you go to set up a project for the client, or if they're doing their own install, if somebody's doing it, the problem can be that you have to run power to these things, and it might be a site that's neg 48 or plus 24 DC, and yet the sensor wants 5 volts or 12 volts or just something different. And it's just more wires to run and more adapting to take care of. So the D-wire sensors, as you know, get around that by just having power over the same wire. So we tried to create more of a USB type experience. We saw this from data centers. A lot of devices for monitoring data centers would have this kind of a concept, but it's spread like wildfire across our entire product line. We initially did it on one small NetGuardian, and it's now on basically every NetGuardian. If we go back to this page now we're past sensors. These are all going to be things that add on to a NetGuardian or replace a NetGuardian in some way. So building access is used if a client has both our T-Mon and our NetGuardian. At one point in the past, somebody asked us, hey, could you do door control? And so, yeah, basically we can. We created a serial-based accessory that's RS-485 to connect to a NetGuardian initially, but now this little door controller piece called the ECU also comes primarily in a LAN-based setup. So it is a standalone device. It's really, conceptually, it's a peer of a NetGuardian, and it's going to connect to keypads and proximity readers and allow the door to open. So that is a possibility. I think this is something that is recommended if people are doing a new deployment and a T-Mon and a NetGuardian. I don't think you need to push too hard to unseat an existing card reader system, because people think of those as basically commodity. But if it's going to be some integration with the monitoring system has new value for them, then that's an option. This is something that many of our larger clients use, power distribution units. So this is an ability to toggle power on and off remotely. The diagram for this is going to look something like this. Some of them will have an A side and a B side, like you see here. So you've got power going to equipment 1, 2, and 3, and you can easily remotely reboot these things. This one in particular is a potential for a 3-in-1 device, because on the front panel you have all your fuses, so it's like a fuse panel and your breakers and such. So it's that power management device that would go at the top of the rack. But then also you have these power outputs, and then the final piece, I have to go to the website to show this option. It would be roughly twice the capacity that you got on that NetGuardian DIN. It has across the top, if we put this optional top board in, you have 16 discrete alarm inputs, 2 control relay outputs, and 8 analogs. And so those are going to be just a kind of a medium-sized NetGuardian capacity. And if you can get to a point where you're promising only one install, you only have to charge for one install, and yet you're getting 3 devices in one, we tend to see that if you imagine 6 hypothetical dollars for 3 boxes that have to be purchased and 3 boxes that have to be installed, if you can purchase a 3-in-1 device like this, it tends to get the cost down a bit. So maybe it's $2 instead of 3 for the purchasing side, but then the install labor can be more like 1 instead of 3. And so it tends to be, this is where we have a much easier time in sales. And as you try to make, your own selling to your end users, if you can do combinations with us, usually the best. So that's why you'll see a consistent theme. If we do something like power control, we're also going to have the option for it to be an RTU like a Net Guardian at the same time. Same thing is true for our HVAC controller. If you need to do lead lag of HVAC units, this is basically kind of a Net Guardian. It has the same web interface. It happens to be up on a wall with a touchscreen on the front of it, but you're going to be able to open it up and wire up all the HVAC units and then have some additional contact closure inputs and relay outputs just for general purpose monitoring. So the idea here is it's just smarter. You can get it on the web. Technician shows up and it's either too chilly or too hot in there because the humans have tighter tolerances than the equipment does. They can hit a comfort button on the touchscreen and it will tighten the window, but it's impossible for somebody to forget because it'll time out. And then the last thing of any importance here on this page is this VoIP order wire. This is from old classic serial dedicated line order wire, but it's done via IP. And the idea is that you can pick up a phone and say, hey, Jim, where are you? Obviously, cell phones have impacted the importance of this. We do have some clients where if it's a very remote set of sites or underground, they may value that ability to have some voice communication at the site. And following the same thing we've been talking about, the VoIP order wire can be a Net Guardian as well. So it can have some number of alarm inputs. Yeah, you can see this one has a 50-pin Amphenol on it. Right. So I'm going to jump in and show you the Net Guardian DIN web interface, Net Guardian web interface. We do have a new, what we call our G6 platform. And so the web interface that you saw on the Net Guardian DIN, quite similar to this. This one will be a little bit superior in terms of some of the gauges and things, but it is both it and the one you saw before are kind of quick experiences. You click around, it's already in your browser, so it doesn't have to spend a lot of time loading or refreshing. And so that's basically what you saw. So I won't spend too much time here. Some of the new things that we are doing though on the G6 platform involve Modbus and SNMP coming into the unit itself, because contact closures are still around, but some devices want to do like an RS-485 connection instead, and you need to be able to say, okay, we're connected to this thing over serial, and here's my propane level for my generator. It's a certain kind of value with a certain ID number and a certain format. It's just a more digital mode of communication versus analogs or simple contact closures. So that is probably the major thrust of where the Net Guardians are going, is to have more smarts to talk to third-party devices on some kind of a serial link, as opposed to only using electrical contacts and voltages and such. And that, oddly enough for us, let's see. Yeah, here. You're liable to see G6 on probably some bids that you might be seeing, or if you're ever working with us on another project and we quote you a G6. So it is important to know what that means. Frankly, our equipment lasts too long in terms of from a sales perspective, where 10 to 15 years down the line, somebody will say, we don't really need to upgrade. They're still working fine. The one time that we do get a bit of an upgrade cycle without, we don't have a battery in our product that wears out or anything, but what happens is the world changes around us. And you will start to see this with power utilities, if you deal with them at all, transportation a bit, anybody who's got a government mandate for security. We're seeing a lot of TLS 1.2 being required. So if you're going to have a web browser, it's got to be secure to a modern standard. And the older processors, including that little Net Guardian DIN that you purchased, those do not have enough horsepower to do the TLS 1.2 encryption, whereas the new G6 processor does. And there's a whole mess of G numbers under 6 in our product line. And one of my big thrusts here was I wanted to get them to mean something. So G6 was named because we have the larger Net Guardian, the 832A, and it was on its 6th generation. But because nothing else was, I said, you know what, let's make G6 be like the model year of the car. It's the iPhone 7. It's the number that identifies the basic capabilities of this. And then whether you choose the small one like you did the DIN that mounts in a cabinet, or you want a big rack mount one like this onto the screen, that's really more of a detail, because the core of the experience is driven by what it can do and what this web interface looks like. So if you do see G6 on anything, and by the way, there is a DIN G6, so if you needed that same capacity, but you needed it to be wanted to be the latest modern thing. And if we quote you a DIN at any point in the future and you don't have a specific part number requested, we would probably choose a G6 because it's the new standard. Now you know what that means. So that's just an important thing to see, because I wouldn't want you to buy something just thinking it's, make a very specific request and I quote it, but then you get it and realize, well, we're not really developing the firmware of that anymore when you could have easily had one of the G6 platform. So that's just an important kind of product generation thing to know. So that it just last like two items here. The we looked at the Team-On briefly. That wasn't involved in the project that you were looking at, but many of our clients that might be putting out bids for you will have one of our Team-Ons. So just what that ends up looking like is, let's see, we'll log back into this guy. This is a central aggregator for third-party equipment and NetGuardians. So the basic screens are going to be like an email inbox to say, yeah, here's all these different things that have happened recently. Any operator can acknowledge. There's a standing screen to say, hey, these are the alarms that are currently standing. And there's a different pivot, which many clients will use, which is a visual description of the same thing, so that you can then drill down and end up looking at a similar list, but it's going to be filtered by which site you drilled down to. So that's the basic premise of the Team-On, and one of its probably the most important thing that it can do is have support for a lot of third-party devices. So we build what we call device modules, because I'm sure you've seen it where your team or any of the end users you work with don't want to mess around with the esoterics of protocols, whereas they just want to be able to pick a template. And so we've built all these templates, and they end up looking, when you go to add a device here, you go to a tree. This one doesn't have them all installed, but we just got a few as a demo. We can go edit, and all of the alarms, if we were to create a new device, are pre-described here. We didn't have to put all this in because the template itself knows that this is going to have some gigabit Ethernet alarms. It's got a variety of different things. So that's the advantage of these templates, is it's just a lot less legwork. Even within a minute or two, if you're not going to do a lot of specific work about specifying, oh, to me that's a critical or that's a major alarm. If you don't dig too deep into that, it could be literally a few minutes just to say, here's the IP address for this thing. You're going to talk to it via a certain SNMP version, give it a name, and hit save, and you could be good to go. If you do a lot of customization, it's very common to then make a copy, and then of course you're benefiting from all that legwork you did on the first one, so that it's faster to roll this kind of thing out.
Okay.
All right. And the number one, probably most important thing, just philosophically, because I know that we had a bid, we don't currently have an active project, I want you to understand the moments where we're going to be best for you, because I'm going to just click through some of my factory tour here. You can see a bit of our facility. We don't make this stuff overseas. It's all in the middle of California. So it's not the cheapest choice we could have made, which means, for either of us to make sales, we have to focus not just on price, but how can we make this thing customized in some way that minimizes your end user labor? Hey, you save some wiring time. Sometimes if it's a government bidder made in America helps, but mostly it's like, what kinds of things can we do to save you enough value where we can actually charge a bit higher price? Because if we just try to do a commodity war and just sell yet another box, it doesn't work very well. So that was the temperature chamber I was just leaning against, where we do hot and cold testing. We'll do like RF testing to make sure that the boxes have a good interference profile and they're going to be really resilient. And then on the production floor, we actually are making circuit boards. So we've designed the boards, they come bare, we put the paste on. There's the SMT robot that puts the parts on there, and then it goes through an oven to get baked in. It's like a conveyor belt. And then there's a whole assembly process, but the kind of the zaniest piece that you really wouldn't think we do, there's a metal shop across the street where we're cutting the aluminum for that, like the NetGuardian DIN that you saw. We cut it flat metal on this water jet cutter, and then the flat pieces go over to the press brake operators, and we bend it up into a box. So I show you all this because we can basically build you almost anything you want in reasonable quantities. If you brought us a project where you needed like 10 or 11 of something or more, that's the point where we can say, we were not going to charge you anything extra. We'll add it to the catalog, it's still guaranteed because you don't want to take on a bunch of risk for something. But what's going to happen is we would take your PO for 10 or 11. We make you one. We're going to build you then ship you the one because I don't want to make 11 and then take them back from you if they're not good. But we hash out any details. Oftentimes we'll do a second rev, and then we get something that can be super custom tailored for something you're trying to put together. Maybe you have a whole stack of equipment. Maybe you're responding to a bid in a very creative way if they gave you some leeway if they didn't demand a certain part number. And just as one example of what that looks like, let me see. Yeah, this one. This was something I did for a utility client. They wanted a power switching device that would go inside a small cabinet. This was probably about 2 feet wide. It was just two DIN rails tall. So pretty tiny little enclosure. And what they wanted wasn't a NetGuardian DIN, oddly enough, you know exactly what this one is. They wanted a DIN rail mount, but it was a very different kind of device. They wanted AC input. They wanted 6 ports of AC output. They wanted to make plus 24 DC inside the box too and have 6 ports of that they could toggle on and off. And then they were just trying to save space and they were really starting to embrace the, hey, help us cram things into one box philosophy. And they said, I got this 4-port serial terminal server. Could you cram that in there too? So I said, yeah, sure, sure. So I took a picture of the NetGuardian DIN. I have a bit of a Photoshop background, so I just stretched and skewed and put ports on this thing and said, this is a virtual. What do you guys think of this? And that was a really awesome thing because they gave me some notes. They wanted it to be shorter because airflow needed to go above and below it in the cabinet. But they said you can go wider if you need it for the space, and I did. Also, where are the fuses going to go? They had lots of questions about the specs, and we ended up with this second round Photoshop, which is pretty close, within a couple of millimeters for what we ended up building. They sent me a PO for this is a bigger utility. I think they wanted about 34, but we would have been happy with 11 or more. And then, of course, we built one, shipped one. I think they gave us some notes on some firmware changes they wanted to see. But this was a way they were able to get a bespoke piece of equipment for a very particular need. So that's the biggest thing I would hope that you get from today is these are these moments where you're trying to build something and you're just not sure how A connects to B, right? It's a legacy device that doesn't talk the new protocol, or you need to fit something into space, or maybe even just down to connectorization. Like, boy, it's really annoying that we have to have all these adapters to make these connectors go to these other ones. That first power switcher I showed you, we built that for a major engineering house where we put it was an Anderson Power Products brand connector. So we just did different connectorization on the back, and that saved them a bunch of time. So those would be the times where we're going to shine the best for you. Obviously, we might get spec'd in again like you had for a bid. But if you have situations where you think, DPS might be able to make me something, that would be the time where we're most likely to be able to quote you something at a price where the client's going to say, yeah, this clearly has more value than it costs, so let's do it.